it is most beautiful and moving to be with you, live and in person. I remember my father trying on his dress whites, his decades-old white Navy uniform, still white. It had a high collar that didn't quite close as he tried it on. It was a few decades old. Anticipation was high. Dad was waiting for a telegram. That tells you how long ago this took place. An invitation to witness history being made. Finally, that telegram arrived. And fortunately, the dress code allowed Dad to come as a civilian in Brooks Brothers and not in his Navy uniform. And my parents headed off to Washington, D.C. on Amtrak. It was March 1979. And Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, and United States President Jimmy Carter were meeting on the White House lawn to sign a landmark peace treaty following the Camp David Accords. The peace treaty, as I'm sure many of you recall, marked mutual recognition of between Israel and Egypt and an end of hostilities that had existed since 1948. More than 3 decades. My father did as he was wont to do, and he brought his camera. He took many, many pictures. And those pictures he then framed, and they graced his office wall, and then when he retired, his home study walls, where they still sit. So I visited with those pictures many times since that time, in the past 4 decades. And what strikes me in those images, and you all can see the same if you Google that peace treaty, was the 3 leaders' faces, particularly when they all stood together facing one another in a kind of triangle with their hands in toward the center, grasped together. Their faces were beaming, and the 3 men were intently looking at one another. They were face to face. I hearkened back to those photographs this week as I've heard again and again about hatred spewed all over social media and in person, of course, in Israel and made, even in this country, made on Jews, and sent back and forth with projectiles going between the 2 sides, injuring and killing. Trying to understand, as I speak to adults and children, and even try to explain to my own the hatred, damage, and complex realities that have been before us. And at the risk of oversimplifying incredibly complicated events, I can't help but wonder, as I see Sadat and Begin and Carter in my mind's eye, I can't help but wonder if this would be happening if people could stand face to face and talk. Not look at keyboards, screens, maps, computers, whatever electronics, send missiles across borders. What is it to look at one another, panim el panim, face to face? For when you do that, it is so much more difficult to deny another's humanity, however imperfect that person and their humanity may be. Distancing and objectifying another allows nuance and humanity to disappear, and the other can become all bad without humanity or redeeming features on any side of the equation. This week in Torah, we find 3 small but famous lines in the Torah portion, not so. They are familiar lines. In fact, I would reckon that everybody here has heard them at least a few, if not many times in your lives, and probably most people here have been blessed with them on one or on more than one occasion. Those 3 lines comprise the priestly benediction, those words I chanted just a few minutes ago, blessing precious little Isaac. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha is how they start. May God bless you and keep you. Think about how many times you've heard those words, how many times you've been blessed by them or blessed others. So we've named babies, bar and bat mitzvah rituals, get those tomorrow. Wedding, confirmations, Some of us bless our children on Shabbat, or grandchildren too. And while I've spoken or chanted those words, I'm not really sure how many times in my life, I must say that this week is one of those that I look back on but a few occasions in awe. Some of you were with us Sunday evening when 8 adult B'nai Mitzvah chanted and read Torah and taught us Torah. And Cantor Goldstein and I blessed them with those words. The day before, I blessed one of the son of one of those adult B'nai Mitzvah. And earlier in the day, Rabbi Goldstein, that was good, Cantor Goldstein, Rabbi Geffen, Rabbi Daniels, and I blessed a groom we've known for many, many years, since he was a boy, and a bride in our sanctuary. And tonight, of course. So those 3 lines, or 15 words of prayer, that's it, 15 words, are small but mighty. They began, as we read in Torah, as the purview of the priests, Aaron and his sons who are given the blessing to bless the children of Israel. And for generations, they remained in the purview of the priests. In fact, in many synagogues, they still do. In our Reformed Jewish world, they belong to all, and they are spoken or chanted in any number of powerful settings. The priestly blessing, or Yivarechecha, as some might call it, is a blessing that, whether you recall the words or not, generally has positive connotations and meaning. It takes us back to an occasion of joy, perhaps to a time of deep emotion, a time when we were with others who might still be alive or perhaps are not, people we loved. When we look at the meaning of the words, they echo with that goodness. Think about it. May God bless you and keep you. Or, as the commentators say, may all the good in your life increase, and may you be guarded from evil. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. That is, may God be generous with you and gracious unto you. And Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May you not be troubled by the evil inclination, or be hurt by any harmful outside forces or beings. It's a lot of good packed in 15 words. 3 words in the first line, 5 in the second, and 7 in the third. The increasing number of words from 3 to 5 to 7 is even given meaning in that blessing. As my dear friend of blessed memory, Rabbi Aaron Pankin, pointed out, the form of the blessing itself points us in a certain direction. It starts small and builds, as if to point expansively from the smallness of human being, to the overwhelming presence of an all-powerful God who sends manifold blessings, the greatest of all being peace. Further, think about this blessing. Don't do it alone. It involves at least one other person. As my teacher, Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman, explains, the priestly blessing requires other people to bless us, people other than ourselves to invoke it upon us. You don't generally put your hands on your own shoulders and say this. It's another image, Rabbi Hoffman says, of humanity at its finest. We shouldn't take for granted the capacity in all of us to interrupt our busyness for the purpose of bringing serenity of soul to others. He says the secret of the priestly benediction is its mutuality, people taking the time out in their lives to bless and to be blessed. So in addition to the literal meaning of the words, this blessing invites us to think expansively, and it invites us to join with others for an elevated purpose. And it does one more thing. It speaks about faces. The second line says, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka, may God's face bring you light or shine upon you. And the third line, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom, may God's face lift upon you and bring you peace. So on one level, it's simply anthropomorphism, describing God in human terms. But considering the image, especially in this era of masks, when someone turns their face to you with kindness, even with a smile behind a mask and you can see in their eyes, when someone lifts their eyes to you, brings light and brightness, a face turned up towards you, eyes meeting, expressions seen, connections noted and felt. Think about it. None of us take for granted what it is like to see another's face. I'm sure none of us do. So now I invite you to a scene from Israel. You may have actually read about it. In yesterday's New York Times, there was a beautiful essay written by a physician in Cologne in Israel, Dr. Adam Lee Goldstein. He's a director of trauma surgery at a hospital in Cologne. He wrote about the unity of his medical team during this current crisis. He described the medical staff gathering one night at 3 a.m. after one of the recent attacks, when he would have liked to have been asleep. He writes, "As I looked around at my colleagues, I couldn't help but notice the diversity of our team, from the trauma center to the inpatient ward to the operating rooms. This was a team of Arabs, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and Druze." He continues explaining, "One of our Arab nurses would thoroughly treat a Jewish wounded woman. A Jewish intern examined a young Arab man who had been injured by a rubber bullet to the chest. An Arab specialist checked the wounds of a Jewish man who had been beaten. And the Jewish cleaning lady helped an Arab man put on his hospital gown. A Jewish nurse cleaned the blood off the forehead of an Arab boy." In Dr. Goldstein's descriptions, we see powerful examples of faces turned toward one another, faces turned toward cooperation and common purpose, and, dare I say, peace. Rabbi Hoffman writes, "The priestly benediction is the ritualized reminder of humanity at its best. It affirms our greatest aspirations, peace of mind, love of one another, the certainty that we are well watched over, that someone cares. Not always a certainty easy to have. Maybe we don't. Would that we could hear the words of this blessing and be inspired to exemplify human nature at its best each and every day. Would that we could bring others to do the same, to turn to one another with grace and kindness, to raise our faces and bless one another with true presence, wholeness, and peace, to turn our gaze from the small, from the petty, from the lack of humanity to the expansive, and to set that example for others, seeking the broad glance of blessing, understanding, and peace. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless us and keep us. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. May God's face shine on us and be gracious unto us. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's face lift upon us and grant us peace and wholeness here and across the globe. May this be God's will and ours.